talking to me this evening, actually. I've been here now 5 years, and when I first arrived, I was told actually that by members of staff that actually inclusivity and diversity here were just tokens and no one really meant it. And I absolutely made a promise that that wouldn't be the case under my tenure. And I've tried really hard to that. And I do have here one of my race advisors, who was actually Myrtle, who was charged alongside Jazz with basically telling me the truth, telling me what doesn't work. And I hope that over the last 5 years, I know we have, but I hope it's evident that we've really tried to make some big changes and actually tried to address that. We've still got lots to do. I'm under no illusion about that, but I do hope that we've got a momentum now to make those changes. And I'm really proud of some of the work that people have been doing. But I'm also delighted that we have a wonderful collaboration now with the National Windrush Museum and the Royal Museum of Greenwich. And Les or Denise will remind me, but I think it was about 8 months ago that you came along and you said, what can we do together? And we talked about some of the things we could do. And this was one of them, was to have an event like this. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for actually pushing us to do events like this. And I hope this is the start of many as well. And also, of course, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Sir Hilary Beckles. Thank you so much for coming. And it really is very special for us that you're going to give your inaugural lecture. And I'm going to let Professor Tracy Reynolds say a bit more about you in a minute, but to embarrass you. But we are really delighted, and we're delighted that this is really the start of our collaboration with the University of West Indies. And I'm convinced it's certainly not the end of this collaboration. It literally is the start, and we're looking forward to where that takes us. And I think the other thing I just want to finish on, because I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to talk much more, but just to say we really actually value our community here, and people like Pamela who are here, Joyce who's here, and others who really, we feel very strongly are part of actually what helps us to make the university better. And without that community, it wouldn't be as great as it is. So really, it's a massive thank you to all of you as well, because it is because of you that we're able to do the things that we do. So I'm going to pass over, but just say I think we're in for a real treat tonight, and I'm really, really delighted that you've come. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Les Johnson. Dr. Les is the founder and chair of the National Windrush. So Les, if you'd like to say a few words.
I'd like to thank Professor Andrew for that welcome, and Professor Jane Harrington. You can talk to anyone who you want. Whether they listen or not is what makes the difference. You can knock on doors, Professor Jane. Whether or not the door is open, that makes the difference. So thank you for opening the door. She's got a wonderful office, by the way. She has this round table and it overlooks the river. And I thought to myself, how much did you pay for this? She sees ships passing by, and I said, how did you get any work done? But she's a wonderful person. And of course, Professor Andrew as well. They gave us such a warm welcome. I always say that words are one thing, but action is something completely different. We can talk and talk and talk and talk, but until we actually manifest those conversations in real action, nothing gets done. It's a pleasure to be in the presence of, I picked him up such words in the Queen's House, but I said, for those who weren't there, I started with the word hero, and then I mentioned legend, and then I said living legend. And it's not very many legends who are living amongst us. So, Professor Beckles, once again, I'll love to embarrass you in front of all your fans. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and for reaching out to us as what you said, a son of the Windrush generation. It's a tantalizing topic, the lost souls of the Windrush generation. just don't know how to take that. So ambiguous, but I'm sure that you'll put your poetry and your eloquence behind those words. So my name's Dr. Les Johnson. Indeed, I'm the founder and the chairman of the National Windrush Museum. I have many colleagues here, and I stand on the shoulders of those colleagues. And they're always trying to say, look, make sure that you get it right. And I never do get it right. But they're a great team because they motivate, stimulate, and do lots and lots of work. And that's why we get things done. I always say, without assets, there's no power. Without power, there's no legacy. Without no legacies, there's no assets. Without no assets, there's no power. And it is a continuum. And we are a part of a continuum. So I stand in your presence. I'm looking forward to the program here. Professor Tracy Reynolds, absolute star. And thank you again, Professor Tracy, for accepting us into your institute and all the wonderful things you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Les. I'd like to introduce now Claire Jackson. And Claire is a poet, and she's going to share with us some poetry. And probably better if you introduce it, actually, and then you can give the right context. Thank you, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be able to be here with you this evening and share my small tribute to our Windrush generation. Sorry, the joys of technology. These poems are in two parts. The first one is, it charts the lives of our Windrush elders arriving in London and the traumatic experiences they went through in finding a place to live and their jobs. The first one is called I Won't Be Here for Long. So, this is England, the land where they say the streets are paved with gold. Well, so far, I haven't seen one little piece. The motherland doesn't feel very motherly to me. The people are unfriendly, the place is cool, the buildings look drab, they look like night. God, what have I come to? Anyway, not to worry, I won't be here for long. My time on the ship, the Empire Windrush, was very exciting. I saw a lot of misbehavior, drinking, playing dominoes, that sort of thing. And I met a lot of nice people, especially one gentleman, Sam King. He took all our details and organized everybody. We shared a lot of do's and don'ts for when we get to England. Little did we know what we would face. Everybody was dressed up to the nines, the men in their sharp suits and ties and felt hats, the women in their flared dresses, tight waists and their little hats, making a fashion statement for all to see. I wonder how I have to dress for the cold that I can feel. Anyway, I won't worry about it now because I won't be here for long. I need to find somewhere nice to live with my friend from the ship. But everywhere I go, they have a sign in their windows. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. I don't know how they mix up black people, Irish people, and dogs together. What foolishness! It makes no sense. What kind of a place is this motherland? Is this how you treat your British subjects? And the dogs as well? Anyway, I won't worry about it now because I won't be here for long. I finally found a room in a house with 6 other people. The room was like a big cupboard. It was so small, but I will bear it. So anyway, I won't be here for long. I must find a job, but where to look? Because back home, I was a big teacher, but here I don't have much choice. I can clean the hospitals, work on the buses, or on the trains, but you know what? I can bear it, as I won't be here for long. I have to put money in the gas meter so that I can cook, top up the electric meter, pay the paraffin man so that I can fill up the heater to keep warm, sometimes even to cook on. But what to do? I need to do it, but I can bear it, as I won't be here for long. From my first pay packet, I have to send a little something back home. It doesn't matter that it's small. Next time, I will send a bit more. So I buy a postal order and one of those little blue airmail letters to send back home. You know what? It's not so bad, as I won't be here for long. I buy a coat and I have to buy boots, scarf and gloves as well. What a thing. How am I going to cope? My goodness, how will I manage in the months ahead? You know what? I will manage because I won't be here for long. My friend said, there's a party down the road. They have one every week. Come on, dress up, put on your good frock and let's go. But you have to give them a little something to get in, a little something for food and drinks. Well, I never heard of such a thing. Anyway, let me tell you, it was so nice. The music was good, but loud. The room was a little dark, and the gentleman I was dancing with, well, he held me tight up against the wall all night. And then he pressured me, and I stepped on him too. Thinking about it, I'll go again next week. I might as well enjoy myself. After all, I won't be here for long. Sorry, I've lost my thing. The second one touches their survival and their journey into their latter years. And it's called We Stayed Too Long. When I came to England, it was God Save the Queen. Now it's God Save the King. Who would have thought I would have stayed so long? I remember that nice gentleman, Mr. Sam King from the ship, the Empire Windrush, who took all our details and kept in touch with us. In spite of the everyday racism he experienced, he made a name for himself and he became the first Black mayor of Southwark. He will go down in history as one of our Black heroes. Well, the years have gone by so fast, I look back and think, have I been here too long? Over the years, I've saved my partner money and I bought a little house. Wasn't much, but it was better than keep knocking on doors and seeing the signs. No Blacks, no Irish, no dogs. In these days, this isn't allowed as it's not politically correct, but at times I feel as if I still don't belong. Imagine, we were invited from the Caribbean to help rebuild England after the war. And after years of working so hard, we can't reap the benefits. Some of us were told we don't belong here. We're here illegally. They lost their jobs, their house, all their rights. They were wrongly detained, denied their legal rights, and threatened with deportation. Shameful. You know what? They were here too long. After years of working and paying taxes, I'm now entitled to my little pension. But guess what? The same pension that I paid tax to earn, they're going to want me to pay tax on when I get it. That's injustice. Who can I appeal to? We now have a king. Maybe I could write to him and request that he investigate the matter. The government could add the payment to the compensation what Windrush veterans are entitled to. They should just give us our due. You know what? We have been here too long. But still, I look back down the years and I think in our own way, we enjoyed ourselves and we had a lot of fun. All the house parties we used to go to till daylight, my goodness, it was good talk. What I didn't like though, and I couldn't understand, why every Sunday we would listen to Jim Reeves records. One of the songs I particularly dislike, I hear the sounds of distant drums. Every time I heard that song, I cringed. It made no sense to me. Give me a bit of Gregory Isaac and Bob Marley anytime. But I wouldn't swap those times for what they have these days. Raves, bashment, dancehall, and such. Not my style. But it just shows you. I asked myself, did we stay too long? Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That was fantastic. I said to you, it's fantastic. It really was fantastic. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Tracy Reynolds. Tracy is the Associate Dean for Research and Knowledge Exchange, Faculty of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and Director of the Institute of Inclusive Communities and Environments. And my colleague, I'm pleased to say, Mrs. Rebecca, and Tracy is going to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Dear delegates and guests, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Professor Sir Hilary Beckles to deliver the inaugural Distinguished Windrush Lecture. So, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is Vice-Chancellor of the University of West Indies. He is a distinguished academic, international thought leader, United Nations Committee official, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. He was educated at the University of Hull, here in the UK. Sir Hilary is a director of Sagicor Financial Corporation PLC, the largest financial company in the Caribbean. Also chairman of the Caribbean Examinations Council, the former chairman of the University of the West Indies Press, chairman of the Caribbean Community Commission on Reparation and Social Justice, president of the University's Caribbean, and editor of the UNESCO General History of Africa series, and a director of the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Centre. He has also served as an advisor to the UN World Culture Report and advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations on Sustainable Development. He is a past Vice President of the International Task Force for the UNESCO Slave Route Project and a past consultant for the UNESCO Cities for Peace Global Programme. He has received numerous awards, including the prestigious Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Global Advocacy. In addition, he sits on the Council of the United Nations University and the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Under his leadership as Vice-Chancellor of the University of West Indies, the institution established a 5th campus. The Five Islands campus in Antigua and Barbuda debuted in a prestigious Times Higher Education ranking in 2019, when it was ranked in the top 4% of the world's best university. Sir Hilary has spearheaded an aggressive global reputation building strategy, which has resulted in 10 global centres in partnership with universities in North America, Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. He has also forged strategic industry partnerships to allow for the widening penetration of the UE brand through new media channels and 24/7 cable television programming, which has been made possible by the creation of a public information and education service, UWITV. Sir Hilary has lectured extensively in Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas, and has published over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and more than 20 academic books. So, could we please give a round of applause?
Thank you so very much. Madam Vice Chancellor, you and your colleagues, Dr. Johnson and your team, Lady Beckles, mother of the house, friends, good evening, everyone. I would wish to give Claire the assurance that I won't be long. But it really is a tremendous honor to be invited to make this presentation on the Windrush. I am a Windrush child. And Dr. Johnson, I did say that it was my intention to speak on the subject of the children of the Windrush, but I gave permission for you to play with the title a little bit. So, lost souls, let's work that through, the concept of lost souls. But my focus is going to be on the experiences of children, and therefore it is going to be in part, autobiographical, but at the same time, I would wish to historicize this subject. It's the best way to put it into context. As an historian, of course, I try to get to the root of everything, phenomenal or otherwise. But what we're speaking about, though, is a migration. We're speaking fundamentally of a mass movement of labor. Now, from the point of view of the investor, it is a movement of labor. From the point of view of labor, it's a movement of laborers. And I think we have to make the distinction between how you are seen and how you see yourselves. We never saw ourselves as labor. We saw ourselves as Black people who were once again on the move. Of course, the British had brought some 3 million of our forebears across the Atlantic, mostly out of what is now known as the Nigerian hinterland, but also to the Senegambia area, and of course, what is currently today Ghana, the Gold Coast. So we were brought across the Atlantic for a specific task. We were not brought on the journey of exploration and to go on holiday. We were brought to perform agricultural work. Britain had taken on the colonies, and it was interesting when we were in the Queen's Hall, and Vice Chancellor, you mentioned that the construction started in 1616, and of course, I remember very well that was the year in which Shakespeare had passed. But before he did, he spoke about the future, and he saw it coming. Colonization, he saw it coming. Within a matter of a decade of his passing, there was Barbados, there was St. Kitts, later on there was Antigua, and 20 years later Jamaica, and so on and so forth. But Shakespeare has seen the whole thing coming and wrote about it. Race relations, the issue of uncontrolled power of individuals to control the lives of people and to own their lives. And so we were brought across the Atlantic. We call it the Middle Passage. Now, the people who survived that were the people who were next targeted for another round of migration. Now, we know from the first Middle Passage that only about 60% of us survived it, that we know. So when the slavery is abolished, eventually what was left behind were the survivors of a Holocaust. The British brought some 3 million people into the Caribbean, scattered them across, and at the end of that 200-year enslavement process, there were only 700,000 remaining. Take Jamaica, for example, the largest of those colonies. 1.3 million of them were brought to Jamaica. 1.3 million. At emancipation, there were only 300,000 remaining. How do you reduce 1.3 million people to 300,000 after 200 years. One of the things that we know about human populations is that they grow. People have sex and they have babies and they grow. If, however, it is negative growth, generation after generation, negative growth, something is interfering with the natural order of things. It could be a virus, or it could be a management policy. Okay, it could be a management policy. It wasn't a virus, it was a management policy. The British entrepreneur decided that we have no interest in the fertility of these enslaved women. They are here to work. A pregnant woman is a threat to the investment. We are here to maximize profits, and therefore female productivity and maternal desire are either outlawed or suppressed. And how do you suppress it now? You suppress it by saying, a pregnant woman, you are going to continue working in that field until you drop your child. And when you drop your child, you go to the house, you clean yourself up and get back to work. Therefore, massively high infant mortality and a very large number of women dying in childbirth. Reproduction, fertility were seen to be undermining of profitability. Now, I'm a Windrush baby. So let's move from that first round across the Atlantic of our four parents. And now this is the second round, back across the Atlantic again. Back across the Atlantic again. So come across the Atlantic, do what you have to do. Now Britain wants us again. This time they want us here. They want us to labor again. So how do you entice massive numbers of people to get on boats again and get back across the Atlantic one more time? The second Middle Passage. That's what we're talking about, the second Middle Passage. Now, in the first Middle Passage, it was labor, not children. The second Middle Passage, nothing had changed. They wanted the labor of adults. And they wanted the labor because they felt that the labor could perform the tasks that were required. No children. There was no policy. There was no provision. There was no organization to have children in that passage, because we would have been a nuisance to what was required here in Britain. Adult labor, high productivity. Now, but why did they believe that these West Indian people could do this labor? Now, they had brought us from Africa to perform agricultural work. We were not being brought to England to do agricultural work. What if they had brought us to work on the farms in England? What if they brought us into the South to work on the wheat fields and the corn fields and the cattle farms? What if they had brought us to do that? Now that would have been a continuation of what had happened. But this now was a rupture. We're not bringing you to work in agriculture. We're bringing you to work in factories, in industry. And we're bringing you to work in the social services. So why did they believe that we could do this work? Well, the answer was very simple. In between the first Middle Passage and now the second Middle Passage, over 300,000 of us were taken to build the Panama Canal. And the Panama Canal was the largest industrial project of the end of the 19th century, the early 20th century, it was the massive industrial undertaking that needed skilled industrial labor. And so they took these agricultural workers from the islands, took them into Panama to build the largest industrial complex. All the industrial skills were required. And many of us here, we have family members who went to Panama, left the plantations, left agriculture, and went to become skilled industrial workers. No one has denied that the Panama Canal was an outstanding commercial success, but it was built on 30 years of West Indian labor. So we have now been changed. We have now been transformed from being rural village agricultural people now into industrial skilled labor. And Britain thought, now we're ready for them again. Bring them back across the Atlantic because they are now skilled in working in factories. Now, we have to realize the fundamental difference between factory workers and farm workers. There's the old tradition, old tradition. You wake up in the morning, it's raining, and you go back to bed. You're not going to work in the rain, go back to bed. Lie down a bit longer. Industrial society, rain, sun, sleet, frost. There's a timeline. You have to be there at 6 or 7, and you are in that position on that time. The elements, nature has nothing to do with it. Now, West Indians were acculturized now in the industrial culture, perfectly suited to come to Britain to work in the revitalization of the industrial sector and to bring precision to the service sector. Many of my own family members came, worked in the factories, drove the buses, and those buses would appear at the bus stops on time. They would leave the depot on their 20-mile journey with precision. This was important. And likewise with the trains. British train must always run on time. And the West Indians came and made sure that those trains were on time. But in that process, something else was happening. You bring the laborers, and what are you going to do with the fact that back home, they have elders and they have children? What are you going to do about this issue of the reconstitution of family? Again, let's historicize. Despite the opposition to child rearing, despite opposition to motherhood and mothering, families were constructed on those slave plantations. They could not survive because the policy was hostile to their presence. So the selling of babies was a norm. It was a considerable market in the selling of Black children. Now, Black woman, she has a child, it is weaned, 3 years old, maybe not weaned, but it was sold. It was sold to Virginia, Carolina, Mississippi. It might be sold to another colony in the Caribbean. So the dispersal of children away from their mothers was a common experience. We made it clear to you, we had no interest in your children. If you have them, we will sell them. They are just a commodity. And of course, we know that the Black woman was conceptualized as perfect property. What is perfect property? If you go to the store and you buy some piece of hardware and you take it home, Within a short time, it loses value, it depreciates. And after a year or two, it has no value, it depreciates. And you can measure that loss of value. With a black woman, you go to the auction block, you buy her for £30 or whatever the figure is. You take her home. What do you get from her? You get 3 streams of revenue and therefore profitability. You get 10, 15 years of labor, which you can measure. If perchance she gives you a child, by the time that child reaches 11, 12, that child is now worth the same as the mother. And when that child reaches 15, 16, that child is worth more than the mother. The retail value of that child is worth more than the mother. So you make an investment of £30, but the investment replaces itself. What a wonderful investment. It's a gift that keeps giving. It replaces itself. But in addition to the replacement value and the capitalization that each child represents, and you know, when you go through the plantation books, the accounts of the plantations, you will see, on the one hand, assets. Assets. 300 acres of land, value. Sugar mill, value. Warehouses, value. 40 horses, value. 350 adult slaves, value. Female, male. 80 children, value. Some of the estates and theirs, it's all set out in the accounts. It's a business. So we know the value of the children, and we know that the children at 9 or 10 years old were now the equivalent to the value of their mothers. So therefore, we can sell them and make back the investment from the expenditure and the mother. Comes emancipation. Something extraordinary happened. Black people in the Caribbean became the most migratory people in the hemisphere because people were on the move looking for their children that were sold. So Barbadians are going to Jamaica, Trinidad, they're going to Antigua, Antiguans are going to Jamaica, and Black people are all over the Caribbean looking for their kids. Migration. Put the kids back into a family because you want to build a family. And when you go through the records, you realize that this search to reconstitute the family is a powerful force in history. It's a very powerful force. And this is why our foreparents kept the name of their enslavers. You didn't keep the name of people who enslaved you because you had a choice. Because when you move from island to island, looking for your family, when you heard the name, someone would say, okay, in Jamaica, okay, there's a plantation over in Clarendon, and there's some Beckles people over there. So these Beckles from Barbados would go to Clarendon looking for their children. So you kept your name as a marker so that as you travel around, you could find your family. This is why I guess my foreparents kept Beckles. At emancipation, the Beckles family in Barbados was one of the largest slave-owning families. They own over 4,000 Africans. And the Beckles clan was a massive slave-owning clan. I'm a Beckles. Don't like the idea, but the Beckles were scattered all over the Caribbean. That's how we found each other. By going to Trinidad to find our cousins and our grannies and our aunts, we kept the names so we could keep an identity for future migration. Now, so our parents came and left their kids behind. I was 4 years old when my parents came. Classical situation. Leave the kids with granny. Let granny raise the kids. And I should tell you, is the best upbringing you can get. A granny mothering, you can't beat a granny mother. You can't beat a granny mother. And why is that? Because we know mothers have to learn the art. Grannies have been through it. Grannies have mastered the art. So when they deal with the kids, perfect reason. Mothers are learning on the job. So no regrets about granny upbringing. Now, in that circumstance, the children who were left behind, I would say that the children who were left behind had maybe some psychological trauma. Maybe some psychological trauma. In my house, there was a picture of my dad, and there was a picture of my mom. And there was a picture that was taken when they got married. And I thought my father was a very handsome, dapper young man. And my mother was beautiful, no doubt about it. And I would look at them and marvel. But they were in a place called Birmingham. And my task was that hopefully one day I would get to see them. And the time came. The letter came. Granny opened the letter. Airline tickets for these kids. Now, and bear in mind how the family was reconstituted. And I want to emphasize that. The same way the emancipated slaves went looking for their children to put the family back together, the migrants who came took time to raise enough money to get the accommodations in place to reconstitute the family. And so my two eldest sisters went first. Then the last two came after. So I was the last to arrive. Out of 6 kids, I was the last to arrive. Now, I must tell you that when I got here, everything seemed familiar to me. I am not sure anyone in my generation thought there was gold on the streets of London or anywhere else. What we knew was that there was a tremendous amount of hard work here as there was hard work back there. We also knew that the white people in the Caribbean owned most of the property, most of the land. We were working for them there, and we come here, and we're also working for them. Okay? So we were working for them on the plantations, and now we are working for them in the factories. So that was a continuity. That was not a rupture. That was what I call a domestic journey. Leaving Barbados and coming to Birmingham was a domestic journey. It was like getting on a bus and going down the road. It was not a phenomenal experience. It was just going down the road in the same old place. And that is why I love the George Lyman story. George Lyman, famous writer, tells the story of arriving here in 1953. And he bumped into another Barbados migrant on the street looking for a job. He cannot write, but he recognizes that George Lyman is a writer because they were on the same boat coming over. And he says to Mr. Lyman, could you write for me, please, a letter? I want to let my mother know that I have arrived safely in England. And Lamin, he dictated and Lamin wrote the letter. And the letter says, "Dear Mom, you will be happy to know that I have arrived in England safely. But, Mom, do you believe that they're having coronation celebrations here as well?" Now, he had left Barbados in the middle of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. There was fanfare, there was music, the place was taken over by this coronation. And he was genuinely shocked to believe that in England they were also doing the same thing. Because she was our queen back there, and she's our queen here. Now, we have to realize the power of continuity. There were no surprises. All the buildings and the streets were the same names as the plantations in the Caribbean. So there was Johnson Plantation, there was Johnson Building. And therefore the material environment was familiar. But something happened to the children. We were not wanted here. We were not wanted in the first middle passage. And we were not wanted in the second middle passage. But our parents insisted, as they did after slavery, we need our kids with us. So we came to join our parents. Now, most of us of my generation, I was just turned 14 when I came. Most of us, there was no educational assessment of the Windrush kids. We, the Windrush kids, were thrown into industrial schools. We were thrown into industrial schools, and our parents didn't understand because our parents were working class people. They didn't understand because all they wanted to know that the children were in a school. But we were thrown into the industrial schools. I was put into a school in Birmingham called Pitmaston, which no longer exists. It was demolished. It was a disgrace. And they knocked it down. And in that school, we did woodwork, we did metalwork, we did pottery, we did technical drawing, and then we were out on the pasture playing sport. Woodwork, metalwork, because this was a school that was structured to take those kids into the factories. That all the neighborhood factories would just take these 16-year-old kids out of the school and into the factories they were. Now, I understood it because grace of God, intuition. The headmaster of my school saw me playing cricket one day and called me to his office and said, "Where did you learn to play cricket like that?" I said, "Sir, in Barbados." "Tell me about your school in Barbados." And I told him the school I went to. I went to one of the old Barbados grammar schools of the 19th century, old grammar school. Now, he said, "Well, what were your favorite subjects in school?" And I said, "Latin was my favorite subject, English literature, and mathematics." There was like an earthquake, like an earthquake. Latin, mathematics, English literature. And we spoke about Shakespeare. Now, He was very kind. He realized that I was in the wrong place, but I was in a place with all the other West Indian children, all the other West Indian kids. So we were de-educated. So here's a household then, my own household, where I was being de-educated. And de-education can have social consequences. My first mathematics class in that school, the teacher was doing some basic quadratic equations. And I was looking puzzled because I am now 14, I'm a fourth form. And the work being done in that fourth form, I had done that in second form back into the Caribbean. So I looked a bit puzzled, I was confused, and he saw I was confused and asked if I have a problem. And I went silent. He said, well, I know you have just come from the Caribbean, but you sit quiet and I will discuss this with you after. Now, then I looked even more puzzled because this is my first week in school. And then he asked if I could do this work. And quietly, intimidated, I whispered, yes, yes. And he asked me to come to the blackboard. He gave me the chalk. I did the quadratic equation, the simultaneous stuff. And when I did that, I had just made an enemy for the rest of my days. That maths teacher decided there and then that I was an uppity nigger, too full of my little self, and I was persecuted by him for the rest of my days. Now, so thousands of us, children, were de-educated because the British government, they don't wish us to be here. They have no provision for us. We were not tested to see our academic standard to allocate a school. None of that happened to my Windrush generation. Now, having gone through that, the vast majority of these kids left school psychologically broken. Psychologically broken, racially denigrated, loss of self-confidence, and thrown onto the labor market without skills, without certification, but knowing well that they should not be in the position that they were in. So they walked the streets. They wasted time in the malls. They formed small groups and they became easy targets for the police. And thus the process of the destruction of a generation of children. That reproduced itself in the next generation. Our parents was also being de-skilled. When my father arrived here, he was a highly certified tailor. His father had put him to a tailoring apprenticeship for 6 years in Barbados. So for 6 years, he attended an apprenticeship with a master tailor. Around the age of 24, he is now a master tailor. My father could make anything. Men, women, children. A couple is getting married. He made the bridal dress. He made a suit for the men. All the kids came to England and could not get a job as a tailor. He went to Woolworths, he went to Burton's, he went to all the places where they made clothing. But the trade unions had said, all skilled jobs are for local workers. Windrush migrants must not have access to skilled jobs. So all of these West Indian men and women who arrived with skills, who arrived with complex skills, women were nurses, there were teachers, there were all different types of people. The men were engineers, they were motor mechanics, they could do all kinds of things, could not get a skilled job. And my father ended up working in a factory making bicycle tubes for 30 years. So parents de-skilled, children de-educated. It was a cocktail of a disaster that had happened. And you could measure it in the children. By the time we had become teenagers and were exiting our 20s, the inner cities of this country were now characterized by youth rebellion. Rebellion in Handsworth, in Brixton, and all the cities, young boys, children in fact, 15, 16, 17, young children were out in the streets in a virtual civil war with the police. Our prisons became filled with them. And that is what happened because there was no provision at all for this generation of kids. So we, the Windrush babies, we were the ones who were incarcerated. We were the ones who were filling up the British prisons. We were the ones who were being shot at by police. We were the ones who were being murdered by gangs. We, the Windrush babies now. Our parents had seen enough. Our parents had seen enough. They had seen enough in the Caribbean, and they had seen enough here. So our parents went to the church. They went to the church and they asked God for help. So our parents took to the church as a salvation to build resilience and to ask for God's guidance. But we, the children, took to the streets. That in itself created a domestic crisis because it would appear that parents and their kids were now at war. The parents and the kids were now at war. Let me give you an example of what happened to me. My mother was a Pentecostal evangelical Christian. Her mother, my grandmother who raised me, was a Pentecostal preacher. So I was the grandson of Pastor King. I had no name. In the village, that's what they called me. Pastor King grandson. That was my name, Pastor King's grandson. So strong evangelical tradition. My father was a Jehovah's Witness. And I would attend some of the sermons with my father, listen to that theology. And the time came when I was 16, and I told my father, I said, Dad, I love you, but guess what? I'm done with that racism. I go to that church, and all I hear is racism. I'm finished with it. My old man says, now you listen to me. Sunday morning, you have 10 minutes to clean up yourself and get in the car because you are going to church. I said, Dad, my brain can't deal with it. I can't deal with this degradation of who I am. He said, well, okay. But when I get back, I want you home. And so I packed up my stuff and went to live with my uncle. Fortunately, my uncle lived on the same street. So discipline had to be imposed, and no 16-year-old boy could tell his father, no, no, no. If you do, out of here. So on the street, many of my age group, boys of my age, found themselves on the street because they were breaking the domestic code, which was not accepted. Girls were also put on the street. Young girls, 16, having their first boyfriends and so on, going out to party, coming home late, relationships break down, young girls on the street, chased out the house. It was all based on fear. Our parents were so afraid of losing their kids, that they imposed a regime of control that no teenager can live with. The control was incredible, you know. So you were having it in the school. You were having it in the factories. And now you are having it in your home. In your home. Tension, conflict. Because I know, because my father lived in mortal fear that his son was going to be arrested by the police and thrown into jail. So, to live out that fear, a regime of control was draconian, not livable, not sustainable. How did all of this start? It started with a love of children. We have children, and we want them in here with us. We will bring them over the Atlantic. We will bring them across the Middle Passage so we can raise them. Family. Great celebration of family. But the cost of all of that in Britain in the 60s and 70s, the cost was severe. And I saw so many of my contemporaries incarcerated. Some of them went in search of refuge. They joined the British Army. And many of them were sent to Northern Ireland, there to die. It was not what they wanted. And I remember, as a graduate student, going into Ireland to do some research. And I rented a vehicle and came into a roadblock, a British military roadblock. I was asked to get out the car, and I did. But the young man with the rifle who was asking me some very aggressive questions, I realized that he was from Barbados. I realized his accent. I'm a Barbadian, he's a Barbadian. And I said to him, my friend, you are a long way from home. And he pushed that rifle in my face and said to me, watch your lip, boy. And I realized, well, we are from the same generation, but look what has become of us. There's now the barrel of a gun between the two of us. And I knew from his age group and his accent that he was my cohort. We were the same age cohort. And look what had happened. These histories, I believe, must be researched and must be told. I know that there is a fair amount of literature that is dealing with Windrush children, but I believe it has to be thoroughly investigated from the point of view of the history. Parents being moved from one continent to provide slave labor, moved to another continent to provide cheap labor, and move again to another continent to provide even cheaper labor. So we, the Black people, we had been on the move for 400 years. Wherever cheap labor is required, they would send for us. And they would bring us. And because of the poverty of our circumstance, we had little choice. We had families to feed, we had children to raise, and we had elders to take care of. And so we did what we had to do. My parents put in their 50+ years in Birmingham. My mother worked cooking in hospitals. She worked sweeping hospitals, came here as a young girl, spent all of her life. My father did the same. After 50+ years, they said, time to go home. You've stayed too long. Fortunately, at that time, I was in Barbados working as an academic. So I was able to mobilize, bring them home. Built a house, they came home. My father died, Mary, how long ago was it? About 7 years ago. My father died 7 years ago, and I was very upset with him. Very upset. He was 97. And I said, Dad, you know cricket. Don't hit a 4. Don't hit a 6. Just hit a 1, 98, a 1, 99, a 100, and raise your bat. I told him to do that. But he went for the big one. And 97, he was gone. My mother was 93. She died two years ago. So they came home. And they spent 20 years. And they passed on. They carried the burden of thousands of West Indians because we were a West Indian community. All the men I had to call uncle, most of them were Jamaican, but they were my dad's friends and I called them uncle. Most of the women who I call auntie were from Antigua and Jamaica, and I called them auntie. They were all from different islands, but we were one family. One of my sisters married a Jamaican, another married a Cameroonian, another married a Kititian. We all, and my wife is Jamaican, we're all integrated. My family is like the United Nations of the Caribbean. One of my sisters married also a Grenadian. So I have brother-in-laws from all across the Caribbean and Africa. But they came home, and when my father had made up his mind that he had had enough, you know, he said, you know, in his own language, I left Barbados as a young man. I went through hell in England. It was rough, but I'm back home, and I have lived to see all of my 7 children become university graduates. Not bad. Not bad for a working class boy to see all of his kids go to university, despite it all. In other words, our spirits were never broken. We never gave up. We never gave up because it was just another journey. I don't know where they will ask us to go next. Maybe Argentina will want people to come and do something and we will go. But the point is, we are getting stronger and we're getting stronger. And look at us. We now have a mother of the house. Speak about opening doors. That's a door opener. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the generosity of your patience. I promise you, Claire, that I won't be lost. You know, that is what Elizabeth Taylor used to tell her husbands, right? But just the way I end. Fidel Castro has held a world record for the longest speech in the history of the modern. Fidel Castro spoke without notes for 5 hours and 36 minutes. And when Fidel passed, all of us in the Caribbean have been practicing. Sure, that record stays in the Caribbean.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very,
Well, yes. It's all right. Thankfully, not trains and catch. Sandy, take the round. Take the round. Oh, maybe it's a confidence.
It is getting late. I don't know about you, but I just, I'm awestruck. You know, it's in terms of social history, I feel really awestruck. We had planned to have a couple of questions, and we are just going to have a couple of questions, and then I'll just round up with a few statements. So, we're just going to 5 more minutes, so just bear with us, and it will be great to have. Great. So Tracy and Les are just going to leave those questions for 5 minutes.
I think it falls on me. I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of Professor Tracy and I to thank you, Professor Beckles, absolutely outstanding. Thank you so much for that. Say this because, as you can see on the screen, hopefully it's on the screen, this is the inaugural distinguished Windrush lecture. And what an inaugural lecture that was. Maybe if I use a cricket analogy, someone starts off strong. They've got a lot to follow from that. So Beckles, I'm just humbled by it. There are a number of questions, of course, that come out of that very profound set of observations. I think the notion of the family is at the essence, and there are many issues to do with the psychological drama of racism, colonialism, and imperialism that we're kind of trying to deconstruct. I think you did that very well in terms of examples that you gave. We won't be able to discuss all of those now. However, I think one of the questions that I would want to ask is why you chose education as that means to start to unravel some of the maybe the traumas that you spoke about, as opposed to, let's say business, let's say politics, or let's say sport, for example. Because obviously you've opened those doors in the field of education, and you're very established in that field. Just very quickly on that point, and then we're going to take a point from the audience.
Well, you know, the famous saying that when you step out of your house in the morning, you don't know where your feet will take you. But I wanted, like the West Indian boy of my generation, I wanted to play cricket for the West Indies. That was my one and only ambition. Living here as a teenager, I played cricket. I was the Birmingham City cricket captain, the youth captain. I played cricket for Warwickshire County as a youth. And then one day I had 2 letters in my hand. One letter invited me to join the Warwickshire staff as a professional cricketer. And the others would go to university. And my family said, you know, effectively, you are going to be the first in our family to go to university. And I was persuaded, so I went off to university. But having done so, I had 3 younger sisters. I thought, okay, I now have to mentor my 3 baby sisters and breed them. So I had that role to play. I took my 3 younger sisters to university. One of them actually came all the way to Hull to join me and did the same degree program. But I mentored those 3 kids. Then the older ones all felt guilty and ashamed that the younger ones had done well, and then they went later on and so on. Then when I graduated, I was recruited to be an accountant. And I was starting out my career as a chartered accountant doing articles. And I was on a subway. I was going from Stoke Newington. I had a sister who lived in Stoke Newington, and I was on the Northern Line going down to Holborn to do my work. And a gentleman came on the train and sat next to me and looked at me and said, "My God, Beckles, what's become of you?" I said, "Prof, it was my professor. He had traveled from Hull down to London. He was an advisor to Prime Minister Callaghan, and he was going to Downing Street to see the Prime Minister. And he sat next to me, and he said, I told him what I was going to do." I said, no. And he asked me to call him, and I did. And he said, "Listen, the university distinguished scholarship for a PhD has not yet been allocated. I'm going to speak to the Vice Chancellor," because he knew me as the student who was leading the anti-apartheid campaign on the campus. I was the one who was leading the divestment campaign of our university. Had so much money in South Africa, and we shut down that campus until they took that money out of South Africa. And that's how he knew me. That was the image I had. He said, no, 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 no. And then I got the letter that the Vice Chancellor and his committee had allocated to me the distinguished PhD scholarship. And I went back to university. And when I got there, they asked me what I wanted to do my doctorate on. And I said, I want to do my doctorate on Japanese multinational companies in Britain. And my professor said, no, no. You're not going to do that either. You are going to do something that is relevant to your people. Go and study the Caribbean, study Caribbean history. The economics of slavery. Everybody talks about slavery and the legal aspect. Do with the finances of slavery. Go and do research on the financial dimensions of slavery. Why did it go on for so long? Who was making it? Why was it so long? So, again, one man changed the trajectory of my life. So,
And of course, we haven't mentioned preparation. I thought we won't.
Okay, so mine's a question for us to think about, maybe not to answer, because I'm very mindful that we need to open up to take a question from the audience. But as Dr. Les said, there is this theme of the reconstituted family and migration as a continuous narrative underpinning West Indian, Caribbean history. And so my question for us to think about is, where does that road take us next? So not to answer, but just to think about, and just maybe we've got some time afterwards, maybe we could think about those discussions as we're networking. But I think it would be remiss of us if we didn't at least have one question. I know there's plenty of questions, but unfortunately, because of time, we can only take one question. I
haven't really got a question, but I just want to say what a wonderful lecture it was. And so much of it resonated with me. But I will just say this about the Windrush generation, because my parents were very much the Windrush generation. I've spent an adult life as the one Black person in an institution. I was the only Black girl in my primary school. I was the only Black girl in my girls' grammar school. I was the only Black girl at Newnham College, Cambridge. And in 1987, I became the only Black woman out of 650 British members of Parliament. And people often say to me, you must be quite resilient. And I always say, I got my resilience from that generation.
Thank you all very much. I'm sat there reflecting as a sort of working class kid from Yorkshire, and sort of think, God, there's so many histories about so many different things that happen in our lives, and and I think actually to capture that history and learn from it and move on is just so important. So for me, the work that the Windrush Museum is doing is therefore just so important, and and if we can grow our collaborations, in collaboration with others, that'd be a fantastic thing for us to do. So I'd be really proud if we managed to do that. But to her, thank you so much for just sharing with us your ability to be able to talk for that amount of time without any notes. It would be impressive. I'd never be able to do it myself. But how you managed to balance the history part of it with your own experiences, your own really brought it home to us all. And certainly I've learned an awful lot from it, and I'm sure you all have as well. So thank you ever so much. And a very small appreciation of, a small token of our appreciation. We have a small gift that I'm going to pass.
There you go. Thank you very much.
And we also have a small gift.
Lady Mary.
Is bigger, but looks heavier.
Well, all I can say is both of them will remind you of being here. Is my only clue to that. So all it remains to do is look, thank you all for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you. Thank you to Denise, the Windrush Museum, and thank you to the team here that's put together today. It's been a lot of work, but I think it's been really valuable in terms of bringing everyone together. So thank you all so much. Please have safe journeys home, and do keep in touch. All the very best.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. Well, there's some drinks left.
It's a journey.